Welcome to our third and final installation of our December webinar series. This is one that I'm really excited about. I've been telling everyone that I'm really excited about it all morning, but I still am. The first half of this is going to be the first half, or at least an hour of Jim's brand new presentation, 7 Costly Retirement Planning Mistakes and How to Avoid Them. We won't get through all 7 because we were able to, at the last minute, secure an hour of Larry Swedroe's time, who, if you have attended one of our past Q&A events that Larry has participated in, he is an expert on all things markets and investing, and he will be here to answer our post-election investment questions. We have a lot of pre-submitted questions, and we'll also be taking questions from the live room. So before we get started, I just wanted to go over a couple things. First, a quick tech check, although I probably should have done that first. If you go to the bottom of your screen, there is in the bar there a function that says chat. If you click on that, a webinar chat should pop up on the right. If you can see and hear me clearly, if you could type a Y into the chat, that'll be really useful. Thank you, Tom and Michael, Chet, Wayne, Allison. Thanks so much, everyone. I really appreciate it. Okay, now moving on to questions, because Jim will be taking questions during the first portion of the workshop, the 7 mistakes portion. And then we'll also be taking questions for Jim from the first half of this presentation and ones that I've carried over from the first and second sessions during the investment portion as well. So if you would like to submit a question at any point, if you just go to the bar at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that Q&A feature, and you can submit your question there. That is the best place to submit it to ensure that it gets answered. So please don't put your questions in the webinar chat. Please put them into the Q&A. Okay, now at this point, I think most people who are attending this event have attended at least one of our other events today. So rather than doing a very, very long introduction for Jim, I'm going to do a brief one. And then when Larry comes on at 4, we'll do a brief introduction for him, and then we'll just roll straight into the question and answer portion. So before Jim gets started, Jim Lange, our presenter today, is a CPA and an estate planning attorney. And he's the author of 10 best-selling books that help protect the financial security of IRA and retirement plan owners and their families. He's been quoted in the Wall Street Journal 36 times. He's a nationally recognized IRA, Roth IRA, and 401k expert who actually authored the first peer-reviewed article on Roth IRAs in 1998, which was published in the AICPA's journal, The Tax Advisor. His insights have been featured in numerous newspapers and publications, including Newsweek, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Forbes, Reader's Digest, Bottom Line, Kiplinger's, and Barron's. He is a paid contributor at Forbes.com, and his peer-reviewed articles have appeared in Trust and Estates Magazine, Financial Planning, and the Journal of Financial Planning. Without further ado, please welcome Jim Lange.
Thank you, Erica. So my original plan and the way I drafted this program had 7 very common mistakes that I see, and my plan was to go through all 7 relatively in depth. And then, but I knew for this whole workshop series that yes, taxes are really important, but people also want to know, hey, what about my investments? What, if anything, should I be doing differently due to the election? And I don't want to, like Clint Eastwood says, man's got to know his limitations. I'm not competent to talk about investments, but Larry Swedroe is. And we were able to contact Larry. He's no longer associated with Buckingham. He's an independent. And he was willing to come on, which I was thrilled with. So what I'm taking the liberty of doing is more or less cutting this program in half. That will give Larry an hour to answer questions, starting with, hey, what should we do differently, as well as questions that we have already received and questions that will still be coming in. So why don't we start with the first question that I want to talk about, or the first mistake that I want to talk about. And that mistake is dying rich is a bad plan. And by the way, I wrote this up as an article that was published in Forbes.com. But I mean, there's not that it's bad per se to die with a lot of money, but the problem with dying with a lot of money is that oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to do this differently. Um, Rather than going through mistake by mistake by mistake, I actually redid this. So I'm going to talk about all 7 mistakes, so you'll know which ones I was planning to talk about, and then I'll just get to the ones that I have time on. So okay, number 1, dying rich is a bad plan, not a good plan. It's a bad plan for reasons that I'm going to go into. Another big mistake, not paying attention or sufficient attention to the beneficiary designations of IRAs and retirement plans. People spend more time and more effort on their wills and their revocable trust, but that's not the document that controls what for many of us is the biggest asset in our estate, which is our IRAs, Roth IRAs, and retirement plans. Taking Social Security too early, very common. And it costs more money than you think. We love the synergy of holding off on Social Security and doing Roth IRA conversions, which other than when we recommend it, we don't see it a lot. We did, like a half a session on disclaimers alone in the best estate plan. And again, except for the documents that we prepare or oversee, we don't see a lot of disclaimers. And I think that is a huge mistake. We talked about who gets what in the second session. We hardly ever see it, again, except for the documents that we are involved with, and it can save people a lot of money. The other one is not doing the math, especially with regards to Roth IRA conversions. I said this earlier, this isn't a matter of opinion, it's a matter of math. And yes, you can argue about the assumptions, and when we run the numbers, we'll do any assumption that you want. But running the numbers is critical. And to think that you can do it with a rule of thumb or a guess, or it's an opinion, or somebody says, well, I like to have 70, it's math. And don't let anybody try to talk you out of that. And the last mistake, and actually I've had this for a while, but it was just recently publicized because Warren Buffett said it was a good idea to talk to your kids about your will, but not communicating with your children about money, prenuptials, and your estate plan and your will, we think is another big mistake. All right, so that's the capsule summary. So now I'm going to go into each one to the extent that I have time. So dying rich is a bad plan. Most of my clients are reluctant to spend how much money they could afford to spend or to give. So even with my intervention, a not atypical situation is they accumulate. Even after they retire, most of their portfolios have grown in the last 10 years, despite the fact that they've lived on the portfolio and their balance is higher than it was 10 years ago. And that trend is likely to continue. And then they die. And at their death, there's a massive income tax acceleration if the main asset was IRAs and retirement plans. And the other thing is, and it's hard to combat, but the problem, not that it's a bad thing to die with a lot of money, but the problem is they miss the opportunity to spend and gift more money while they are alive. So if you don't really make any significant gifts to your kids, if you don't spend anywhere near what you can afford to spend, what's the point of dying with millions and millions of dollars when you could have helped your kids out when they were younger and you could have helped yourself out more? And I know that people say, oh, I have everything I want. So I might throw in a couple ideas that maybe, well, again, if you know me, you've heard many of these things before, but I will throw out a couple ideas on ways that you can maybe die with a little bit less money. And I think a lot of times it's just inertia. Uh, it's not recognizing that it's more of a failure to die because of recognition of the mistake of dying rich, rather than, okay, my plan is to die rich. That's not usually the way people think. It's kind of inertia. Here's where I am. Here's my comfort level for spending. Oh, gee, if I really looked at it, it would turn out I'm going to likely die rich. Um, so one of the problems, frankly, is the advisor. Um, if you go to a traditional advisor who is charging you, let's oversimplify it, 1% for all the money that they are managing. Let's say that you have $5 million and uh, it makes sense for a lot of reasons that I won't get into right now to gift your kids $1 million. And let's say that they do that. Now the money managers, unless they're managing money for the kids too, but if not, the money manager just reduced their fee by 20% by giving you the right answer. Now, some legitimately, want you to have a huge, huge buffer, and I get it, but a true fiduciary advisor is encouraging gifting. I was able to talk to one client, and he heard what I said, and sure enough, he gave his kids $1 million. And Jen said to me, you just lost, like a couple $1,000s or even more per year indefinitely because of that piece of recommendation. But of course, she understood I'm a fiduciary, and we're going to do what is best for you, not what is best for us. By the way, I've been doing these recommendations for a lot of clients. Um, and I made less money. And by the way, the same for Roth conversions. To oversimplify, let's say you have assets of $1 million in an IRA and $400,000 of after-tax dollars, and the money manager's managing 1.4. And then I come along and say, hey, why don't you do a series of Roth IRA conversions? So at the end, you have a big Roth and you paid $400,000 in taxes. Now the money manager's only managing one. So his fee just went down. So you really need a fiduciary advisor to be telling you some of these pieces of advice that not only doesn't help them, but actually hurts how much money they make. But that is part of being a true fiduciary, which a lot of people claim to be fiduciaries. A lot less people are true fiduciaries. So what are some of the benefits of doing some of this planning? One, you could spend more money and have a better life. I haven't convinced anybody that I know of you know, to buy a Ferrari or to buy a big expensive house or, well, actually, that's not quite true. More second houses. But with planning and knowing, and again, I'm not saying to spend to the point that you're endangering your future, but spending more money, you can have a better life. You can gift more to your kids. That's an easier sell than to have you buy a Ferrari. And gift to your kids when they are younger and they can appreciate the value of the gift a lot more than getting money after you die. You get it to them when they really need it. That is life changing for them. And I've used this example before, but I'll do it again. If somebody gave you $100,000 today, for most of the people on the call, not going to change their life. They might not do anything differently. What if somebody gave you $50,000, which is more or less the same adjusted for inflation 30 years ago? That might have made a big difference. Well, maybe your kids, even if they're not asking for money, maybe your kids are in that same position. And by the way, I suspect that your kids have a lot more financial stress than they let on. I think that that's fairly common. And if you can reduce their stress levels, boy, the whole family is benefiting from all this money that you work so hard and long to save. Um, Again, getting money to people to spend more money is tough. Doesn't mean I don't try. The biggest area where I have made an input is travel and experiences with family. So many of you have heard my story with my father-in-law, Walter Weinstein, who is 100 years old, and he has for the last 25 years been sponsoring relatively expensive family vacations in the Poconos. The whole tribe gets together. There's about 30 of us. Other than booze, he pays for more or less everything. And he's maintained the family as a unit. My daughter, who is now 30 years old, and she does have a disability, she is part of a family clan that would have never happened had it not been for these annual 4-day get-togethers where she hangs out with all her cousins. Now they get together on Zoom calls, and the family is much tighter. And yes, when he dies, he'll die with some less money, but boy, what a wonderful, wonderful legacy. Again, many of you have heard this before, but travel and experiences with family, I think, is a wonderful way to spend your money. And I've actually made inroads, and people have actually bragged to me that they are now doing family vacations, which is, I think, is wonderful. All right. The other thing that, again, this is like, I'm very generous with your money, aren't I? Another thing that I want to bring up is spending some money on your health. Right. So Cindy and I have and our daughter have a concierge medicine doctor. And not because, she's a genius and the best doctor in the world, um, but because if there's a problem with any of our healths, we send an email and we get a response in a day. And the meetings, instead of lasting 10 minutes, last an hour or two. And they're completely on top of our vaccinations and where we are and our diet. And they just do so much more because they have so much more time than a traditional doctor. And that doesn't mean you have to get rid of your traditional doctor. You can have both. But I'll just say having concierge medicine doctor can really make a difference. It's wonderful to pick up the phone or an email and get a response, maybe not that day, but usually within 24 hours, and to know what to do and to have their opinion on different things. I read about health stuff all the time, and it's great to have that kind of backup. I like having a personal trainer. 3 days a week, somebody comes to my house. I don't have to go to a gym, which costs time, and I don't like it, and have to deal with showering and all that. But 3 days a week at 7 a.m., ding dong, oh crap, the trainer's here. And do I enjoy it? No. But do I do it? Yes. And we mainly work on strength and conditioning and stretching. I do the aerobics, typically walking and biking on my own. But it is that discipline that, frankly, if they don't come for some reason, I typically don't do it. I'm not proud of that, but that's just the way I am. I don't have that kind of discipline. That's enforced discipline. 3 days a week, ding dong, crap, the trainer's here. Okay, let them in. And we have like a little improvised gym, and I go through that training. And it is wonderful. And I know that I'm in much better shape than I would be had I not had that. So I'm going to encourage you to do that. The other nice thing about the personal trainer is they get to know you and they know you physically. And at least mine does research and says, okay, hey, this is a great exercise for your biking. Hey, this is a stretch that we never talked about. We want you to use these kettlebells because we think that that's cooler. And again, I'm very happy. I recommend it. I've had, and by the way, it's not because I'm so wealthy. I have a lot of clients that have a lot more money than me and Cindy, but they don't do any of these things. We've had a nutritionist who has helped design our meals. I think it is important, and they did it with what we like in mind, the best practices. They recognize the differences in our respective metabolisms, et cetera, et cetera. And I eat better and healthier because I have this nutritionist. And by the way, I don't have a good, well, I'll forget. The other thing is I get regular massages once a week. Ding dong. That one I don't mind. I'm happy. Um, and she comes in, um, she, I call her the dominatrix because she's pretty tough. And it's not necessarily always pleasant, but boy, I think I'm in much better health because of that. So that's another way to spend some money. Again, don't die with a lot. Do some of these things um, to uh, help yourself be in better shape. Spend some more money. Okay, another mistake, or another method of spending money, and the name of this is not original. It goes to Dan Sullivan, who wrote a book called Who, Not How. So all our lives, most of us have been conditioned when there is a problem, the issue is how do I solve my problem? And Dan's point is that's the wrong question. The right question isn't how I should solve this problem. It is who should solve this problem for me, even if it costs me some money. And by the way, this does not mean asking your spouse to do what you don't like to do. Cindy might have some words on that. Unfortunately, I do that. I don't know where I would be without her in so many areas. But I don't ask her to do things that I can get other people to do. So, for example, we do have a house cleaner. We do have people taking care of the yard. We do have, plumbers and electricians and, a whole host of service providers because I don't like to do that stuff. She doesn't like to do that stuff. And to me, it's a better solution of instead of how do I do this stuff, but it's who should do this stuff for me. In an ill-fated example of, well, we both were in a mood to save some money, so we washed all the windows in our place in Tucson. It was just her and I. And that might be the last time I do that. The windows look great. And yeah, there was a feeling of accomplishment, but it wasn't fun. And frankly, I just wouldn't miss the money that I would pay somebody to wash the windows. So again, who, not how. I have clients, some of them have a lot of money. They don't have a house cleaner and they're doing it themselves. They don't have someone mowing the lawn. They don't have somebody shoveling the snow. You can use those people. There's, even if you have a good work ethic, I think it's perfectly fine to outsource some of the things that you don't like to do. Now, if you like to shovel snow, if you like to clean your house, if you like to mow the lawn, I'm not saying don't delegate things that you want to do. And a lot of people say, oh, they would never clean it as well as I, and that's true, then fine. But don't do it because you're trying to save money. What's the difference if you die with 3.2 million or 3.4 million? It just doesn't really matter. But if you can improve the quality of your life and the quality of your kids' lives, that would be a great thing. So I was doing a review with a client, and without getting into details, they could certainly afford to go to Florida for a couple months. And they were telling me, oh yeah, I really want to go to Florida. That sounds so cool. And to me, I'm pretty proactive. So this is one of the things I did in a financial review. I literally went to Airbnb.com and I said, here, you could stay at this house. It's going to cost you $4,000 a month, and you could do it for 2 months, and you'll have a wonderful experience. And the $8,000 that you spend, and maybe a little bit of airfare and a little bit of extra, it just won't make a difference in the big scheme of things. And it didn't really even occur to them that they could do that. And what a difference to spend a couple months in the sun. I like Tucson better than Florida, although I was in Florida for a while. I'm a hiker biker, and Tucson is better for me. But boy, why not spend a couple months, particularly if you live in the Northeast. And if you have a good reason that isn't money, that's fine. But if you can afford it, do it. I have another client. He wanted to do it. His doctor recommended that he do it, and he didn't do it, and he died. Well, that's no good. Spend some money on yourself and your spouse. Go to Florida. And then before I talked about the benefit of family vacations, get out of the cold, wet, if you're in Pittsburgh, where I still live and practice, get out of that cold, wet winter. You don't need that. And, Erica said, oh, it's 56 degrees today. Well, that's great here. It's sunny and 70. And it'll be that way most of the winter. Maybe it goes down to 65. The other big thing is help your kids when they need the money. Not making gifts, dying, paying big taxes, and then your kids inheriting the money when they're in their 60s or 70s. That's just not a good plan. Sorry. I'm not going to let you off the hook on that one. And again, depending on how much money you have and how much money your kids need and position and blah, 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 that's one of the things we always like to look at. But that is one of the game changers that, well, does it cost you money? Again, what's the difference between dying with 3.4 and 3.6? Just to use that one example. It doesn't matter, particularly if you can do some of these things that have such an impact on the quality of your and your kids' lives. And then I get the objection, oh, I don't want to spoil them. I don't want them to lose their work ethic. And if your kid or your grandkid is 21 years old and they're alcoholics and they're stoners and they dropped out of college, and that's maybe not a good candidate to make a significant gift to. But what if your kid is 50, 55, they've been working for 30 years? Well, their work ethic is already there. I don't think that you're going to change the way they are, the way they're wired, by helping them out before you die rather than while you're alive. And that's when they need the money. That's when their kids are going to college and they're feeling heat of all the expenses that they have and putting money in their retirement plan and funding their Roth IRAs and funding their life insurance and paying for the braces and the college. And by the way, guess what? It's not over just because they graduate. It's a fantasy that a lot of parents have. They're stressed about money, and you can help them out. And what else is the money going to do? What else are you going to use it for other than yourself and your family and maybe a couple bucks to charity? So I say help your kids out when they need it the most. And I know that that's not the kind of standard advice that you get from an advisor, but anyway, that is what I believe. And again, I think your kids' values are probably fairly well formed. And what if they are struggling? I think a lot of people get that intellectually. They don't necessarily do it. And they don't realize that their kids are stressed. And to me, I'd rather see you err on the side of being loving, kind, generous, rather than austere and strict. And I don't want to spoil my kids. I think that it's just going to lead to a better life for you and your kids. And when your kids use some of that money to build or upgrade to a bigger kitchen or a more updated kitchen, then you can blame me. Okay, maybe that wasn't the purpose. So again, facts change to preserve confidentiality, but this is the idea. So two clients in a relatively similar financial position, both of them, let's say well above the $5 million mark. And one client was very, very generous, and both of them had one kid, and both of them had a kid that didn't make a lot of money. They were working in the nonprofit sector. Both kids were in the nonprofit sector, not making a lot of money. And one client was very, very generous with their kids. They helped them out substantially, and that as a result, that kid was able to have well, they lived in a nice neighborhood. They at least had the option to send their child to a private school if they wanted to. Their children's education was provided for, and the parents were proud of what the child was doing. And again, for the parent, their spending was fixed. What they were giving to the kid, it just didn't matter for them. They weren't going to go out to dinner one more time or one less time than all the help that they didn't. The other client in a pretty similar situation hardly gave their kids anything, maybe an occasional $18,000 or something like that. And that child was maybe a little bit above the poverty level, but basically the child spent most of their adult life at that income level because they got a meager salary from the nonprofit, maybe a couple bucks from mom and dad, but not much. And then when these clients die, the kids are going to get millions of dollars. And what's the difference if the kid is 65 years old and they inherit 4.8 million versus 4.3 million, compared to getting benefits their whole adult life that made a huge difference in the quality of their life, and frankly, the quality of life for the parent who saw the kids enjoying the money. And this just it's a really common mistake. So don't make it. Don't make it. Be generous. Help your kids when they need it. You don't want your kids to get clobbered with taxes, PA inheritance tax, which to some extent could be avoided, income taxes on inherited IRAs. It could be much worse after the Secure Act. I'm not saying don't have money for a rainy day or contingencies, long-term care, emergencies, but most clients are way too pessimistic about what could happen, even after the new administration, where there are some additional risks, I will concede, but you don't want that to dominate your planning, particularly if you're giving money to your kids who aren't planning on blowing all of it. I mean, presumably, even though I've never seen it or even come close to it, presumably, your kid would help you out if you're out on the street, but I don't think that is a legitimate worry for most of our clients. Oh, Jim, I might get sick and need long-term care for 10 years, 20 years. Usually when you get to that point, you don't live 10 or 20. Again, I'm not saying don't overprotect, but don't do it to the extent that you are really hurting yourself and your family. Again, taking the other argument, the black swan, a huge disaster. I'm not saying to ignore that, but I don't think that should rule your finances. Okay, believe it or not, that was just mistake number one. I'm probably only going to get to about 2 or 3 of them today. Next mistake, I see it all the time, is people, they go to an estate attorney. They come with wills and trusts, and they're this thick, and they have everything thought out. Oh, well, that's great. What's the beneficiary of your IRA and your retirement plan? Oh, well, my wife number 2, my kids equally my wife number or spouse number 1, kids equally number 2. So where's most of your money? Oh, my IRA and retirement plan. A Roth IRA. Okay, so let me get this straight. The document that controls, let's say the smaller part of your estate is this thick, has a zillion contingencies, a zillion what ifs, everything else. But where the real money is controlled by two lines, one spouse, two kids equally. That's not a good plan. I blame the estate attorney. And somebody says, well, I never talked to my estate attorney about the IRA. To me, a good estate attorney, just like a good financial advisor, just like a good CPA, should not just be a historian that only responds to the questions that you ask. They should be proactively recommending things. I can't tell you how much business I've got, not because the previous CPA, the previous financial advisor, the previous attorney necessarily did a bad job. They just weren't proactive in helping people save what was potentially a ton of money. And particularly for big IRA owners, you really want to make sure you get that retirement plan beneficiary designation right. And if a trust is the beneficiary of the IRA, you need to get those 5 conditions right, which more than half the estate attorneys botch. And then if you have a special needs trust, then it's even, you need the 5 conditions and you need the money, the provisions to protect the money from the government. So you really want to get this right. I see it botched routinely. Sometimes you get away with it. Very frankly, sometimes you don't. And sometimes you're not alive to realize you didn't get away with it. But we, the estate administrators and people that come and take a look after somebody dies, we see it. It's tragic. By the way, sometimes you don't get caught. Sometimes there's workarounds. But why not just do it right? Again, best practices. Get those IRA and retirement plan beneficiary designation optimize. It's really important. It can make a huge difference. And I see this even when people have most of their money in their IRAs and their retirement plans. And again, I'm going to blame the estate attorneys. By the way, we get it right. Our law firm, you know, we didn't even let clients fill out the beneficiary designation of their retirement plan. We didn't let financial advisors fill out the beneficiary designation of the retirement plan. We filled it out often by hand, because every beneficiary designation, whether your money is at Schwab or TD Ameritrade or Charles Schwab or wherever it is, at TI Craft, every one of those institutions has a different beneficiary designation of the retirement plan. So it's not so easy for a layman to get everyone right because they're all so different. And the other thing is, this is going to sound a little arrogant, if we come up with this beautiful plan that's going to save your family hundreds of thousands of dollars, I don't want to see that botched because somebody didn't fill out a form right. I want to get everything right, which is one of the reasons why I actually look at the beneficiary designation of the retirement plan when I do these consultations, because more times than not, it's botched, and we want to get that part right. And again, I blame the estate attorney, and I don't want to stick up for too many estate attorneys do too many things. And to me, I think if you have a client with a big IRA, that's a specialty area. And somebody who is doing, divorces and real estate transactions and litigation and malpractice, they're not going to have the bandwidth to really get some of this stuff right. And frankly, since it does make a big difference, you want to get that stuff right. Again, we would fill them out ourselves because clients get it wrong. And spouse and kids equally is, maybe you get away with that, but maybe it ends up being a terrible mistake that costs either the money goes to the wrong place or it costs the kids a lot of money. Okay, third mistake, failure to include disclaimers in your planning. We see that all the time. Very few documents that we review have disclaimers in it. Again, that was a major portion of the second session today. But and one of the people said, "Hey, do you really need to have it in the documents?" And you don't absolutely need it in order to have an effective postmortem disclaimer. We like to see it there anyway. We think it's best practices. Without it, we don't see a lot of people disclaiming, but with it, we see a lot more people disclaiming. And we think that the failure to include disclaimers in the documents, and again, when I say the documents, I'm talking about your wills, your trust, the beneficiaries of the IRA, the beneficiaries of the retirement plan, the beneficiaries of the Roth IRA. For most people, I want to see disclaimers in all of those documents. And we just don't see that a lot, which I would consider a major mistake. And again, I've been utilizing disclaimers since '95, when hardly anybody was doing it. Now it's much more common. And I'd like to say, oh, that's because of my influence. And that's not true. It's because people just caught on. Oh, this is a good idea. We should start including them more. And I can't tell you how many people, after they've heard something equivalent to the second talk that I gave, said, hey, we want disclaimers in our documents. And again, I've seen massive failures to optimize for families by failing to disclaim. If we get involved, we always look at disclaimers both before somebody dies and after the first death, and then even after the second death. And we want to get all the documents prepared, even if we're not preparing the documents anymore. Again, we can refer you to somebody. We have more referral points in Pennsylvania than throughout the country, but even throughout the country, I have made referrals, sometimes based on either personal knowledge, depending on the state, or I sometimes just look up the estate attorney, see where they've published, et cetera, et cetera. So having money going to the next generation, or even the second generation after the first death, that's a mistake. It's a variation of the same thing. Not having disclaimers, not utilizing disclaimers, but a lot of times you can really maximize family happiness by doing that. Let me take a quick look. Let's see. How am I doing on time, Eric? I think I have about another 15 minutes. You can chime in, but well, if I do, rather than go on to the next mistake, how about if I take this opportunity to do one or two questions about the mistakes I've already done? Because I do like questions, and I think it keeps things a little bit more interesting.
Yes. Okay. We have a question from Rashid who asks, Roth conversions, should I pay taxes from after tax money or have them withdrawn from the IRA? And actually, we had a few questions this morning on that same theme. Some of them were asking, like, why is it that people who recommend Roth conversions only recommend making them if you have the money to pay the taxes from outside of the account itself? So if you could speak to that general question.
Sure. In general, all those math models that I ran that showed that people were hundreds of thousands and sometimes your kid more than $1 million better off, like our daughter will be, is based on having the money to pay the taxes on the conversion from outside the IRA. If you run the numbers by using money in the IRA to pay the tax on the conversion, you come much closer to a break even. So the math just doesn't work. We actually did a radio show just on that topic. But that doesn't mean that, let's say that you're in one of these positions, and I'm going to tell you, this is something that, again, Dave Ramsey he would not enjoy hearing this at all. And maybe a lot of you wouldn't either. But let's just say, for discussion's sake, that it really makes a lot of sense to pay to do a Roth IRA conversion and you don't have sufficient funds outside the IRA to pay the IRA. And I just said, hey, don't use the IRA to pay taxes on the Roth IRA conversion. One of the strategies that we are recommending after running numbers, and this is one of those strategies that not only passes the math test, which it usually does, but it has to pass the stomach test, is we sometimes get a home equity line of credit. And we use that money to pay, which is non-taxable. So let's say we borrow 100,000, we borrow 200,000, or whatever it is. The money comes into us non-taxable. That's the money that we use for a Roth. And then when you run the numbers in the long run, the family is sometimes way, way, way better off. So it's not just a question of, do I have the after-tax dollars? Do I want to pay taxes from the IRA? Sometimes there are alternatives. Some people use margin accounts, which is a little bit, but for the right people, it's fine. Again, if, Dave Ramsey says, oh, no, you should have your house paid off, by the time you retire. And for a lot of people, that makes sense. And, nothing against him or Susie Orman, but I don't think that they're talking to people who have a couple $1,000,000 and are trying to maximize. I think they're talking to people who have well less than $1,000,000, and they're trying to make sure that they don't end up in the poorhouse. And very frankly, they have their place, and a lot of their advice is pretty good, but that doesn't mean that it applies to you. Mistake, which is, again, getting some money out of the estate after the first death, to the kids, sometimes to the grandkids. And again, that helps your kids. And by the way, this isn't necessary for them to get a Ferrari. Maybe they can optimize their own retirement plans. They can put money in IRAs, more likely Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, 529 plans, which is a tax-free growth, maybe getting them into a house that they could not do without your help. And the timing of when they get their money, I actually think is very important. And then I'll leave this question to you. So let's say that your kid wants to have kids, but they're not quite financially ready to have kids. Is it kosher for you to bribe your kid and say, hey, if you have a kid that is your grandchild, I'll help you out, with $100,000, I'll help, I'll take care of the college fund for the grandchild. I'll do this for them. I'll help you to get into a neighborhood that has a better school system, whatever it is. I'll leave that one to you. But very frankly, that's what a lot of parents who would like to be grandparents are thinking. And then their kid is thinking, well, I'd love to have a kid, but I don't feel like I have sufficient money. And maybe if you, kind of combine the two, and the grandparent says, well, hey, I'd be happy to help you out. Would love to have a grandparent. Well, you're still a little bit younger. We're still not only younger, but we're still here. I don't know if that's kosher or not to say, well, for each kid that you have, we'll give you $100,000. But anyway, I think that you get where I'm going, which is that is another way that you can help your kid in a way that would be good for your kid and good for you. And you don't necessarily have to say, hey, I'll give you $100,000 per kid, but maybe you can say, well, gee, I can help you out if you do have a child. We'll take care of their college fund. We'll take care of life insurance for you. So if something happens to you, that your child will be provided for. Hey, we'll spring for the attorney to do new wills that have guardianship provisions, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll just say these are some of the ways that you can get the most. I like using disclaimers for grandchildren's education, maybe a private or parochial school. maybe a 529 plan. Doing this type of planning is really good. Okay, next mistake, which I suspect is going to be the last that we're going to have time to do, is taking Social Security too early. Most of my clients are better at this than, let's say, the general population. But especially if you have a husband and wife and one of you has a strong work record for the purposes of collecting Social Security, subject to relatively rare exceptions, I am a big fan of the person with a stronger work ethic to to hold off on Social Security till they are 70. And I just saw Larry Swedroe pop up. I'll just maybe finish my point, and then we will get to Larry, who I suspect many of you are more interested in hearing than my mistakes on Social Security. But before you disregard this advice on Social Security, let me just tell you I've authored peer review articles on this. I've written 2 best-selling books on this. I've had Larry Kotlakoff, who's probably the top expert in the country, on my radio show multiple times. I've had Jane Bryan Quinn, I've had Jonathan Clemens, I've had Mary Beth Franklin, I've had Elaine Floyd, and all of them are basically going to be agreeing with what I am saying, and many others, which is subject to pretty rare exceptions. I am interested in the stronger person, the spouse with the stronger work ethic, I'm sorry, not work ethic, work record for the purposes of collecting Social Security. Wait until 70. Here's that, the break-even point. And when I've shown this in the past, Larry Kotlakoff was so funny. Right on the radio show, we're going through this, and I show him this graph. And he didn't say the graph was wrong, showing the break-even point about at age 82, and depending on what assumptions you use. He said, Lange, you have it all wrong. Don't think like an actuary, think like an economist. If both you and your spouse die early, you're dead. Dead people don't have financial problems. What you're worried about is living a long time and outliving your money. So an economist would say the risk isn't dying early, it's outliving your money. So therefore, hold off on your Social Security, get those 8% increases for every year that you wait, and you will have a most likely a better and better protected life. At this point, I think it is time for me to say thank you very much. Thank you to Larry. Erica, I know I wanted the first question. If you have that, you can say that, or I could say it. And then we do want to have an introduction for Larry, but I am always delighted to see him, and I am particularly delighted now. So Erica, do you want to go into?
Yes, absolutely. And I will second your feelings about always excited to see Larry. He is such an amazing answerer of all of our audience's questions, and particularly on this subject that we all have so many questions on. But just for anyone who has not attended or had the privilege of attending one of our webinars that he has participated in before, I have a brief introduction. And then, Jim, I do have that first question. If you would like to ask it, you can ask it though, but I'll just do his introduction first.
Okay, go ahead.
Larry is recognized as a leading voice in evidence-based investing and was among the first authors to bridge the gap between academic research and practical strategies by translating complex concepts into clear, accessible language for everyday investors. He has since co-authored or co-authored 17 books on investing, including his latest release, Enrich Your Future: The Keys to Successful Investing, first edition, which was published this February. His insights on investing and behavioral finance have been featured on major networks such as NBC, CNBC, CNN, and Bloomberg Personal Finance. Beyond television, he's a prolific contributor to leading financial platforms, including Morningstar, Wealth Management, The Evidence-Based Investor, Financial Advisor, Alpha Architect, and Seeking Alpha. We're thrilled to welcome Larry back as a guest presenter for our audience. And again, as I mentioned before, he's previously received outstanding reviews, and we're really confident that today's Q&A is going to be another insightful and engaging experience for everyone. So thanks so much.
Thank you very much. But before we take the first question, I just want to add one comment to Jim's point and also Larry Kotlikoff's point. It's something I tell all investors making that Social Security decision. Unless you know, for example, that your life expectancy is likely to be short, maybe you're overweight, diabetic, and a smoker, or you have some kind of disease that you're likely to die early. Delaying Social Security is the only time in your life you will ever get to buy insurance and get paid for it. Because what you're doing, as Jim pointed out, maybe without using those exact words, is you're buying insurance against living longer than your life expectancy. And the market is paying you in the form of what's called mortality credits to do it. So unless somebody else can point out to me an opportunity to buy insurance and get paid for it, this is the best thing you could do, except if you do expect to die early for whatever the reason.
Well, Larry is very prolific and knowledgeable about so many topics, and I appreciate that. But I'm going to take a shot at the first question, and then we have some more that people sent in, and then there'll be some from what Erica calls the live room. All right, so Larry, we now know something that we didn't know, say a month ago. We know President Trump won the election. We know that the Republicans control both the Senate and the House. We now know we have some non-traditional appointments or nominations for some of the different cabinet positions. What should investors do differently? I know you have a million ideas in general on what investors should do, but what should we do differently now that we have this information at our disposal?
Important question, Jim, and an interesting one. I may take this in a different direction than maybe you would expect. But the first thing investors should do maybe differently is to avoid making one of the most common mistakes that investors make, which is to allow their political biases to impact their investment decisions. There's really good research on this, which I'll describe as follows. When the party you favor, let's say, Jim, if I don't know whether you want to disclose to your audience, do you tend to vote Republican or Democrat?
Well, I think that they've already heard a few things that they could probably surmise that it would be leaning Democratic.
Okay, so you tend to lean Democratic. So what your tendency will be as an investor is when the Democratic Party is in control, they have the presidency, maybe Congress as well. When you get a financial crisis, you will likely feel more confident that the administration will be successful in implementing policies to correct the crisis and get us out. So you will tend to avoid panic and selling relative to other investors. And by doing nothing, which is almost always the right strategy, except to rebalance your portfolio, not panic and sell, you will outperform your other investors who tend to be Republicans because they will not have that same level of confidence. They will be more likely to panic and sell. Now, the reverse is true for you when the Republicans are in power. Let's use the last 2 decades or 2 decades plus. When Bush was president for the first 8 years of the millennium, Republican investors outperformed Democratic investors because they tended to avoid panic and selling when we had the events of 9/11, for example. Then when Obama became president and the Democrats controlled, the Democratic investors outperformed the Republican investors because they weren't as likely to panic and sell. And then when Trump became president, it reversed and etc. So what you want to do is to make sure you are not projecting your own political views into your portfolio decisions. So this means if you're a Democratic leaning investor, then you should avoid changing your investment policy just because of your views of what you think might happen. The evidence is on terms of the ability for the markets to, or professional investors to forecast is horrific. There are virtually no people who have good track records of forecasting the market. Peter Lynch, maybe one of the greatest investors of all time, said he never tried to time the market. Warren Buffett tells people don't try to time the market, but if you are going to do so and you can't resist, buy when everyone else is panicking and sell when everyone else is getting greedy. So what you want to do is avoid listening to forecasters. And here's the second mistake that can happen. So, Jim, you said you're Democratic leaning. If you hear a forecast now that will say Donald Trump is now president, this will lead to bad things, X, Y, and Z. Let's say tariffs will lead to higher prices and the debt is going to be worse, and et cetera, et cetera. You will tend to have what is called confirmation bias. You'll say that person is brilliant in their analysis, confirming your fears. And if you heard somebody who said, now that Trump is president, we're going to get a lot of deregulation, that'll be great for innovation and corporate profits will rise, et cetera. And you will say, oh, that person is a dummy. They don't know. And you'll ignore their advice. So that's compounds the problem that I mentioned earlier. So what you want to do, number one, you should avoid allowing your political views to ever influence your investment decisions. That's number one. The second thing is I would recommend people who are interested in learning more about planning for retirement is to read my book, Your Complete Guide to a Successful and Secure Retirement, where we talk about all kinds of things, not just investment strategy, but planning a life in retirement, estate planning, annuities, elder care, elder abuse, passing on family values. And what every investor should do, whether Trump has won the election or not, is you should have had a well thought out plan that made sure you didn't take more risk than you had the ability, willingness, and need to take. And I provide formulas to help people determine that. Then they should build highly diversified portfolios, not using individual stock selection, market timing, globally diversifying so that you don't have all your eggs in what might be the wrong basket, and then simply stay the course. So my advice is, if you have that plan, don't do anything different.
Great advice. And by the way, I even took the liberty of saying, oh my goodness, look at some of these cabinet appointments. Who knows what's going to happen? Uncertainty. But I didn't give any advice. And I did say, oh my goodness, I'm not a huge believer in tariffs. I don't know if any of these plans are going to work. But I didn't want to give investment advice because I'm not the expert in that area. Let me do one follow-up question, which I know is particularly in the minds of a lot of our Democratic listeners. They go, okay, Larry, I get it. Don't let, and Warren Buffett has said it for years, don't let my political leanings change my investment plans. And yes, when George Bush won, even though I wasn't a George Bush supporter, the market did just fine. Or the Republicans said, okay, I'm not an Obama supporter, but the markets did just fine. Is the fact that Trump is, I say, so far off the norm, is that sufficient reason to overcome your normal recommendation, either for a Republican or a Democratic voter, to do something different? Just because I think that you would agree that, he is less traditional than, say, George Bush 1, George Bush 2, Ronald Reagan, etc.
Yeah, well, certainly I think we could all agree he's non-traditional, so we could set that one aside. Here's the best advice that I think I could provide for your listeners here. One of the worst mistakes that investors make is they confuse what I call information, which they think has value, okay, with truly value-added information. So this is not going to answer your question directly, but I'll get there. So Jim, let's say, did you ever buy an individual stock before you read my books and decided you shouldn't do that?
I did. I did. I haven't for a long time, but I did.
All right, so you did. All right, I'm sure being an intelligent person, you didn't just throw a dart at the Wall Street Journal and pick a stock. You hopefully did some research. You read about a company, you checked out their earnings, you looked at their balance sheet, you read all kinds of reports, and you decided, boy, this stock is trading at 30 and it's really worth more. It's a great investment. I'm going to buy it. Something like that happened, I would imagine, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the mistake that you were making in doing that is what you thought was information was simply that, but it had no value, as I'm about to demonstrate, hopefully, to you. And hopefully your listeners will remember this whenever they think they should act based on information like a particular company. So let's say I listened to your list of 10 really good reasons, and I said, let's for the moment accept that those are all correct, that analysis is true. All those things, good management, good balance sheet, good products, et cetera, et cetera. And then my question to you is, do you think that Warren Buffett, the smart people at Renaissance Technologies, the smartest guys on the planet who have had great returns as a hedge fund for 30 years, at Millennium and Investors and JP Morgan and Templeton and all these people who spend 100% of their time focused on markets, are world-class mathematicians with PhDs in finance, they are unaware of the things that you told me. What do you think the odds of that being true are?
I would say somewhere between 0 and negative.
Yeah, right, right. And so let's say that stock was trading at 30 and you thought it was worth 40. If it was really worth 40, would Warren Buffett and the traders at Apollo and others be sitting on their hands watching it at 30, knowing it's worth 40, or would they have already bid up the price so it would be trading at 40? Which do you think is the more likely answer?
I think that they would be buying it if they thought it was a
Right.
bargain.
In other words, in the collective wisdom of the market, right? The market thinks it's worth 30. So what you're saying is, okay, today we have 90% of all the trading is done by big institutional investors who certainly have more knowledge, the time, experience, etc., than you do. Okay, they get to meet the investors, the companies, interview them, all of this stuff, access to data you don't have, that you could do a better job of analyzing than they are. The facts of the matter are this: the stocks individuals buy go on to underperform after they buy them, and the stocks they sell go on to outperform after they sell them. Now you have to ask, there must be somebody on the other side of the trade who's exploiting the naive retail investor. And it is the institutions. The problem is 90% of the trading is done by the institutions today. So when Warren Buffett is buying 70, 80 years ago, it was the reverse. 10% of the trading was done by institutions, 90 by individuals. There was less than 100 mutual funds, by the way. So that Warren Buffett could exploit us as retail investors, and that's how he got such great returns. But today the competition is very different. So then there was a 90% chance Buffett was buying, an individual with less knowledge than him was selling. Today, when he's buying, 90% odds that a big institution who knows as much as he does and is as skilled is on the other side. So that's why Buffett has not been able to outperform the market in the last 16 years, despite outperforming by massive margins in the prior 50. So what we want to do is think about it now in terms of your question about Trump. Whatever you know about Trump is already known, right, by the Warren Buffetts, and they pay all kinds of brilliant analysts to take a look at the, all of the strategies Trump has proposed. They're thinking about the odds of them being successful implementing them. For example, and almost impossible to predict the future, better than the market's wisdom. So, for example, Trump threatened big tariffs. He ended up with not much in the way of tariffs, right? In fact, Biden kept them on, virtually all of them, and even increased some of them, right? And the market did just fine. And inflation did not go way up. We don't know what the impact of Trump's tariffs will be. Will he use them mostly as a bargaining chip and get better trade deals than they've had? Or will he actually impose massive tariffs, which could, I think most of the people are wrong. Tariffs are not inflationary. That's wrong. I can explain why if you want to dig into that. They're actually deflationary because they could lead to retaliation by other countries and world trade would shrink and everybody loses. And that's one of the great reasons we had the Great Depression. So we don't know what Trump will able to actually pass. A lot of market optimism now is betting he'll be able to get rid of a lot of unnecessary regulations that both Obama and Biden imposed and has really led to slowing of industry and investment. If that were to happen, it could stimulate growth. We don't know. We don't know whether it'll be able to cut spending with this Doge committee. We like to think so. We know there's massive inefficiency in government, but we don't know if he'll be able to even legally do a lot of things. So my view is this. What you want to think about is where are the risks to you? And that's how you should try to build a portfolio to make sure it's resilient to the risks. To me, the biggest risks are one, in possible inflation caused by the excessive budget deficits from every administration post Bill Clinton and made far worse under the Biden administration, and which led to the higher inflation that we got until recently. We are now at a tipping point where the US debt to GDP ratio is in excess of 100% and headed much higher, rising several percent a year. No country in the history of the world has been able to grow its economy at a, let's call it 2% kind of growth rate when you've had persistent debt to GDP ratios at those levels, because government spending starts to crowd out private investment. Governments borrow at the cheapest rate. They have to borrow more and more. That pushes interest rates up, and private business and investment tends to go down. And today, US interest payments on debt are at the same percentage of our GNP as Greece's was in 2011 in the middle of the Greek crisis, and it's certainly headed higher. So one risk, I think, is to the economy. So you might want to think about how much equity risk you might be willing to take. I'm not recommending selling stocks because stock returns could still be good, but there is this left tail risk out there. And the other is budget deficits like this can lead to high inflation. That's what Argentina looked like, for example. It's possible. I'm not predicting that, but I have moved my portfolio towards much shorter term fixed income and avoiding locking in long-term interest rates at these levels because of those fears. So I want to add to my portfolio assets that don't have negative impacts from either the economy or inflation. So there are some assets like reinsurance, for example. I have 10% of my portfolio in reinsurance because hurricanes and earthquakes don't cause bear markets, and bear markets in the economy don't cause earthquakes. So that's an example. High quality private credit is another example, has some economic cycle risk, but in a bad year, it might lose 5 to 10%, where equities might lose 50. So that's how you have to think about your portfolio. What are the risks that you're most exposed to? And retirees are more exposed to inflation risk than people who are working and likely to get pay increases in line. And how much economic cycle risk can you take, right? That's an issue for people to think about. But don't make it based on decisions about who's the president, what the policies are, because literally nobody knows what's going to be implemented.
That is very helpful, because what I found really interesting about that answer is you acknowledge the problem with the deficit, you acknowledge the problem with inflation, but you're not saying, hurry up and sell all your stocks and put everything in bonds. Maybe do a little bit on the fringes, maybe think about reinsurance, maybe think about let's call it private lending. But even with all this knowledge, that the market has that same knowledge, don't try to outguess the market, which is exactly why I wanted to have you on, because I, can point out some of the problems with the different nominees, and you're saying, yeah, I get all those problems, but don't panic, hang in there.
Yeah, well, even on that issue, Jim, and I happen to agree, there are probably 4 of the nominees that I would think are horrible choices because they're totally unprepared. Even if they were smart people, I think I'm an intelligent person. I graduated #1 in my class at one of the top MBA programs in the country at NYU. But you wouldn't let me operate on you if you were a patient. I tell doctors who think they're investment experts and they've never, taken a single class in capital markets theory. I asked them, well, I'm intelligent, but you wouldn't let me operate. What makes you think you're a good investor just because you're intelligent? So, but they're unlike the Secretary of Defense position. Here's somebody who's going to have to run a multi-million people organization who's never managed anything, right? You need leadership skills. To me, totally unqualified for that position. There are several others I would not, but we don't even know that they're going to be, they'd be nominated, but whether they could pass the Senate. We've already seen one highly unqualified person, had to drop out because he never could have gotten through. When we think about forecasts, you have to remember my warning. Ignore the warnings that agree with your positions because you're not learning anything. You always want to listen to opinions that are the other side, and maybe you might pick up something, right? So that's one little bit of advice there. But I would tell you ignore all forecasts because the evidence shows in peer-reviewed studies, there are no good forecasts. If you don't believe that, look at the Federal Reserve's own forecast of interest rates. They couldn't have been more wrong in the last 20 years. If you look at their plot of where they were for, and they control the short-term interest rates, right?
Sounds great, Larry. I'm going to ask the team to put up a link to your book, which is wonderful. I think I can, without reservation, recommend it to everybody. as a whether you're a do-it-yourselfer, whether you're going to use a money manager, whatever it is, having more great information from an objective, true expert is wonderful. I'm going to ask them to put the link in, and then I'm going to let Erica get to what we promised, which is the audience to ask their questions rather than be back and forth. Frankly, I would enjoy that too.
There is one question that I get frequently, which I'm happy to pine on if we run out of questions, but I think important for your audience to listen to, and it will embed a lot of the mistakes that we've talked about.
All right, Erica, why don't you reserve a couple minutes at the end, but why don't we go to some audience questions, okay?
Yes, I do have an audience question for Larry, and I believe I will need to supply the link to Larry's most recent book. So that'll be in the chat just as soon as I ask this question, which comes from Terrence in Alexandria, Virginia. And Terrence asks, is the small cap value premium still in existence? Ditto on international diversification. What is the least % position that would be worth keeping to cover bets, especially for long-term Roth IRAs where you can be patient for decades? I think they're saying where you can hold investments for decades.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good questions in one there, and it's actually one that I was going to address myself. So let's start with the international one first, and then we'll come back to the small cap value question. All right. So I just participated in a panel yesterday for a major European educational institute. And one of the questions I got was, why has US economic growth been much faster than European growth? And in effect, that gets to this question of US stocks have far outperformed international stocks since around 2009. Okay. So I did a little bit of thinking over the weekend and I wrote up some notes. And I want you to listen carefully to the points I'm making. So I came up with 4 economic factors for why the US economic growth has been faster than European growth. The first is the US has a very strong culture of innovation and entrepreneurship, fostering a vibrant startup economy. This has led to higher levels of research and development, driving technology advances and productivity growth. Second, really importantly, most people don't focus on this, we have much more flexible labor markets. It's much easier to fire people in the US than it is in Europe. In fact, in Germany, it can cost like 10 times as much to shut down a plant because you have to pay workers a certain amount versus the US. So what does that mean in terms of your willingness to make an investment and start up a company and build a plant? It means in the US, you're far more likely to start a plant here because the cost of shutting it down is much lower, making the present value of an investment much higher. Because we don't know any investment will be successful. Let's just use a simple example. Let's say you invest $10 million and there's a 10% chance you can make it a $100 million company. And there's also some chance it will fail miserably. And if you have to shut it down, it could cost you, $1 million. All right. So what's the present value of that investment? You run the numbers and it's positive. You look at the same thing in Germany where it costs you 10 million to shut it down. Well, 10% of the chance of making it 100 million is 10 million. And there's a chance to go to zero. The present value is now negative maybe. So you wouldn't make the investment in Germany where you would in the US. That's really important. That's why the unemployment rate in Italy and Germany and other countries in Europe is so much higher than it is in the US. Third thing, we have higher productivity level, partly due to factors like we adopt technology quicker, our education levels and work practices. Partly work rules in Europe where there's much higher percentage of labor unions, fewer hours worked for those reasons. And the fourth was US consumers just love to spend. So we have a high propensity to spend. That drives economic growth, increased demand for goods and services and investment. But I also came up with 4 policy factors. First, we have a much more favorable regulatory environment. And here's where Donald Trump can actually make a huge difference. This may shock some of your listeners, Jim, and may even cause you to slightly change your political views, at least in some cases, maybe. Do you know that the cost of building a home in California is 40% higher, or 40% of the cost of building a home in California is due to regulatory rules? It takes forever to get permissions, the sewers, the environmental, all these things that could take a decade to get a house built, where in some Republican states, it'll go right through and the cost would be 40% less. That's a big difference. Regulatory barriers in the US are generally much better than they are in Europe. We have lower corporate tax rates. What people don't understand is corporations do not pay taxes. All this nonsense about corporations should pay their fair share. Corporations do not pay taxes. What happens is the prices of goods are higher because of the taxes. The wages are lower because of those taxes, right? That's what happened, because corporations have to deliver a certain profit after taxes to justify investor capital, which has nothing to do with the corporate tax rate. They demand a certain profit number. So the evidence is clear. When you have lower corporate tax rates, you get higher investment, which leads to higher growth. And that's exactly what happened in Trump's first term, for example. It's exactly what happened when Bill Clinton also cut tax rates. And it happened under Ronald Reagan when they cut tax rates. So that's an issue there. Third is we have much stronger intellectual property rights, and we have more open markets generally. Now, we don't know what Trump will do with tariffs. That would be a negative for growth, as I mentioned earlier, and that would hit stock prices, I think. But it's important to also note these are general trends, and individual countries can be different. Denmark, for example, has easier rules than maybe Germany does or Italy does. So that's there. So what should the takeaway from all of this be? People are listening to this and probably saying, especially since they know the last 15 years, US stocks have far outperformed, right? Their takeaway is, well, why should we own international stocks? That's diversification, a term that's thrown out there, not, improving the portfolio. Well, let me point out what I said earlier. If I could come up with these 4 policy and 4 economic reasons, do you think the smart investors at all these major institutional hedge funds, pension plans, et cetera, are they unaware of these things? Of course not. They certainly are aware of it, and therefore it should be already reflected in prices. Just like this. Now listen carefully. Growth companies, which we can define as companies that have higher PE ratios, because people are willing to pay a higher price to get a higher growth in future earnings, very logical, have actually delivered that higher growth in earnings than cheap value companies. Okay, so you would think they got faster growth in earnings than they would have outperformed value companies. Over the 100+ years of data we have all around the world, value stocks have outperformed growth stocks, except recently. Okay, it also happened in the late 90s, by the way, and then reversed. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So we also have data that shows that countries that have higher growth rates actually have lower stock returns. Why? It's pretty simple for two reasons. One, if you have a higher growth rate, I think there's less risk that companies will go bankrupt, right? And that they're more likely to be successful. That means it must be safer to be an investor in that country with those stocks. Everyone understands the basic principle, risk and expected returns have to be related. So if you can't make the argument that you should have a safer investment and get higher expected returns. I think everyone listening would say, well, for all these reasons, Larry, isn't the US a safer investment? I would say yes. And therefore, you should expect lower returns because that should be in valuations. Now, let me add this. And then I'll show you a couple of charts. If you can allow me to share the screen, I'll show you a few charts, which I think will make a big impact. I'll take care of that, Erica, as long as you've allowed it. So the US has far outperformed in terms of stock returns for the last 15 years. However, almost 75% of that outperformance has nothing to do with faster growth in earnings. Almost all of that difference, so 3/4 of it, is due to US valuations getting higher and higher and higher and higher, which of course eventually has to end, just like the dot-com bubble has to end. It doesn't mean they can't go higher and higher for another year or two, right? But it's dangerous when you get stock returns going up much faster than earnings, and that's what we saw in the late 90s. And we did get one of the few periods like this last 2 years. It's only happened 4 times when we've had 2 years or more of 20% plus returns in a row in the S&P. In over 100 years of data, it's happened 4 times. And the 90s is the only one that happened more than 2 times. So that's a little bit of a warning. I don't make a prediction. Bubbles can get bigger, but I would warn people about that and don't project the recent past into the future. But here's the bottom line on this. That outperformance has led to US stocks being at record high valuations relative to international stocks. So I just checked the forward-looking PE ratio for the S&P 500 for the next year's earnings is trading at 23 times. In Europe, it's in developed world, it's 14. That more than explains the difference in faster growth in the GNP, and therefore one should expect higher expected returns from international stocks. It's not a guarantee that we'll get that, of course. We don't know what risks will show up, and higher valuations can get bigger, just like at the start of last year, or start of this year, many people were saying US valuations are too high. Some people were predicting bear markets because of that. That's why we don't try to time markets. But I'm just pointing out, you want to be very careful here about this. So let me, if I could share, that's a screen. Let's see. Oops. Let's see. There we go. All right. So I want to come back to that one in a minute, but okay. Here's this period. Let's say you're an investor and you listen to the wisdom of diversifying, and you build a globally diversified portfolio, maybe 60% US, 40% international, which is about the global market cap today. And then you observe for 5 years returns like this. And Jim says to me, Larry, why do I want to own international stocks, especially emerging market? They've been horrible. I should own, and why do we want to own small value stocks like the Russell 2000 small value. Now, that would be ignoring the 70 years of data before that, when small value stocks had outperformed, having recency bias, and also ignoring the fact that because the S&P did so well, its valuations were now at a record high. And value and small value stocks were trading about their historical average. So Jim doesn't listen to my advice, switches his portfolio, he sells his international, and especially, and he puts it all in the S&P 500. Okay, so poor Jim, what happens to him? The next 8 years, Jim observes the following returns. Those lousy emerging market stocks are the best performer. This is 8 years now, right? So massive returns. The S&P is by far the worst. Small value is the best by far in the US. And Jim says, Larry, you know what? You were right. It's now 8 years later. I should have listened to you. I'm going to go back and buy that diversified portfolio. So I'm not putting too many eggs in one basket. And then, of course, we get the next 15 years and international does poorly again. And now Jim may want to switch back again and maybe he'll go. What I tell people is the most important thing is have a strategy and stick with it, because you're going to be tempted to chase whatever is the best returns. So for those of you who think the US is the best place, ignoring all that I've tried to teach here about, we all know everything I've told you, it's in valuations. The high returns we've gotten recently have pushed valuations to records. Look at these 3 periods, which is totaling 45 years. That's almost half of the time we have data for. And in these periods of at least 13 and as long as 17, in these periods, that's totaling 45 years, you were better off in T-bills, totally riskless, than you were in stocks. That's a problem. And here's the point that you should also take away. The first period here, 29, begins at the end of a big stock market boom when the US was the best stock market in the world. Valuations were going high. Stocks have reached a permanently high plateau, said a famous economist. And then we had a crash. The next one was the era of the Nifty 50, and stocks went through the roof. The 50 through 65, stocks kept going up and up, the best period we had ever had. And then, boom, valuations crashed, and we had bad returns. And we all know what happened here in the late 90s in the dot-com bubble. We are at the same kind of valuation levels in the US. I'm not predicting tomorrow US stocks are going to go down or do poorly. I can't predict any more than anyone can. I'm just pointing out that every time in the past that we have had periods of much higher growth in stock returns than in corporate earnings, the outcome has been poor returns for the next regime. Okay? And the same thing is true about small value stocks, as I showed you there. And today we are at virtually record highs where small value is trading at the cheapest it's ever been relative to the S&P 500, just as international stocks are trading at basically record lows relative to the S&P 500 as well. The problem here is this, and I would ask everyone, maybe even write this down. When it comes to investing, I think one of the worst mistakes investors make is they think that 3 years is a long time to judge performance, 5 years is a very long time, and 10 years is an eternity. That's simply wrong. 10 years is just noise, is the term economists would use. And you need to build a diversified portfolio that you could stick with, because every risk asset will go through long periods. And if you doubt that, take a look at this chart. Here's 40 years. Now, if you're a U.S. pension plan with nominal obligations, so non-inflation pension plan for your employees, your riskless investment is not 1-month treasury bills, because rates could come down and you're getting low returns. Your riskless investment is a 20-year long-term government bond. Over this 40-year period, U.S. large growth stocks, the darling of investors for the last decade, underperformed, and small growth stocks did even worse. That's 40 years where you went unrewarded and took, at least twice the risk here. So you have to stay disciplined. And to answer your question about small value, we'll make this quick and wrap it up. If small value had disappeared as a premium, then the valuation spread would have narrowed. So by that we mean, let's say small value stocks are trading at a 10 PE or 2 times book, and growth stocks were trading at a 20 PE or 4 times book. So 2-to-1 ratio, basically. They would have narrowed because money would have come into small value, pushing valuations up, would have left large growth to buy small value, right? And their valuations would have come down. And instead of, say, a 10 PE and 20, 10 for small value, 20 for growth, it may be 12 and 18 or 15 and 16. Well, this was at the end of last year, and it's gotten even worse now. The spread went up like 60%. It's gotten much cheaper, which means you should expect the future value premium to be even bigger. And we see the same thing when we look at PE ratios here, and we see the same thing when we look at small growth versus small value. That was in the large, and here is PE ratio for small growth versus small value. So this is the way an economist would look at these things. So hopefully that answered the bunch of questions we had in that first one, Erica.
Great. Sorry, you were just so prepared. I wasn't sure if we were going to have time for more questions. But we do have a lot more. So one other question that actually came from the live room, because I've only been able to ask one, and it was pre-submitted, is I have a 40-60 portfolio of index funds. I'm 71. What is your opinion of replacing the total bond index fund with a floating fund that yields over 6%? The fund is Janus Henderson AAA CLO ETF.
Yeah, right. Okay. So number one, I would never recommend the total bond fund because it owns mortgage-backed securities. And that's, in my opinion, a lose-lose proposition. And 2022 was a clear example of that. Let me explain briefly why. If you were buying, say, a total bond fund and may have had 30% mortgages in there, and let's say interest rates on mortgages were 5%. Now, investors are buying that mortgage expecting the average length of that mortgage will be outstanding, say, 7 years. Now, let's say rates go way up to 10%. Now, no one's going to leave their home with a 5% mortgage. And instead of lasting just 7 years, it's now going to last 10, 12, 15 years. And you're stuck with that 5% mortgage for a lot longer than you were willing to hold it in the first place. On the other hand, if rates collapsed, as they did in 08, you thought you'd be getting that, 5% mortgage for 7 years, and now it got paid off next week, and everyone refinanced, and now you're having to reinvest it not at 5%, but at 3%. It's a lose-lose investment for which you get a very small premium. So I would rather you see maybe a bond aggregate which owned only either governments or high investment grade corporates. And I even prefer pure treasuries to that because I don't think you're getting enough credit premium in corporate credit. Having said that, I'll add one other thing and then I'll give you a specific recommendation. I think people should only invest in things they fully understand. I doubt that there's many people on this call who even know what a CLO is. It's a collateralized loan obligation which aggregates, hundreds, if not thousands, of private credit loans, puts them into security that S&P Moody's would rate, and then this fund is buying the highest credit quality in that. That's a AAA rating. So it's at least reasonably secure credit, and you're getting a 6% yield. But remember, you don't earn the yield, you earn the net return, which includes net losses. I would expect this to be a fairly safe investment, and you are getting a big premium over treasuries, especially over floating rate, which today, let's say a treasury bill is 4.5 or so, and so you're getting 6, that's 1.5%. So you have to ask the question, am I getting enough of a premium to compensate me for the risk? I think that's reasonable, but you make sure you understand the investment. I think there's a better investment from my own perspective when there's a funds run by a firm called Cliffwater. They invest in the unrated loans, but very high credit quality. The average historical losses have been under 1%, and the fund is currently yielding 11.5. That's net of expected losses. And it's floating rate credit. Now, you are taking the first loss here, risk that you're not taking with the AAA rated. It's AAA rated because other people in the lower tranches, the triple C's, the double B's, the B's, the A's, double A's, are taking the first losses that occur. So you're getting more credit risk, but you're getting a massive premium. And you're buying a fund that only provides limited liquidity. It's called an interval fund. So once a quarter, you can request your money to get out, and they're required to pay out a minimum of 5% a quarter. And if the fund isn't what's called gated, you can get your whole investment back. 10% of my portfolio is in that fund because I think that premium is massive, and I'm only taking I'm sure Jim has mentioned RMDs, or required minimum distributions. Even at age 90, it's only 10%. So if you're not taking more than 10%, you don't need liquidity, and people love liquidity even when they don't need it. So I'm reaping that reward because most people don't like illiquidity. I'm willing to live with it, and I'm earning now, and have been for at least a few years now, of 11.5%. It was higher until the Fed cut rates, and I'm willing to accept some credit risk. I think in a really bad economy like 2008, the fund might lose 5% or 6%, something like that. It's a lot better than equities, which might go down 40, 50, 60%. This fund has historically had volatility of about 2%. So 1/10 of that of equities. I think that would be a better investment. I do have to warn you, though, that fund is only available to approved investment advisors, so you'd have to work with somebody who has access to that fund. Other than that, like I said, I think that's a fund that at least has reasonably low costs, which is important. The expense ratio is low. It is higher quality in that spectrum, but I'd make sure you understand the credit risk that you're taking. It's not riskless. I'd say low risk, and maybe you are compensated fairly with that extra about 1.5% right now. The name of the fund that I mentioned is the Cliffwater, I think it's their middle market lending fund or private credit fund. The symbol is CCLFX.
And I should mention that Larry is an independent. He has no financial interest in you investing, not investing, whatever you want, which is one of the things I like about Larry. In addition to some of the great information that we've had.
And I'll put my money where my mouth is. So I only recommend things I'd be willing to invest in myself.
And that's the same with Jim. He always talks about he only recommends strategies that he himself would do or has done with his own funds. I have one question for you that a lot of people have asked Larry before I ask the next actual question, which is, would it be possible? A lot of people were wondering if they could get a copy of the slide deck that you shared.
I'll be happy to send it to Jim and he can pass it on.
Thanks so much.
Why don't we add that as a bonus for attending? So, and I'll do, I know.
Okay, hold on, Jim, just so I handle the technical part of this. Anyone who requests the digital bonuses will make sure that once we have Larry's slide deck and also the post-election tax planning newsletter that we mentioned, we'll send those as an additional bonus, but you have to be opted in to the digital bonuses. So make sure you request those using that form if you haven't already. And I will repeat that information, and Eric will put the link for that form into the chat a little bit later. Sound good? Okay, great. So Larry, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at these questions. I know you did address a question on small cap. There were several others that I had kind of sandwiched together, and I'm not sure if maybe you already kind of covered this. So please feel free to say, actually, I pretty much already addressed that and I can move on to another one. But we did have a question, a pre-submitted question and one from the live room. Gil asked, the S&P 500 continues to make new highs while small cap value continues to lag. Understanding that this all goes in cycles, do you have any sense of when we can expect small cap value to shine again? And is the uncertainty of future interest rate cuts weighing heavily on the answer? And then Ravi asked, since large cap has had such a fantastic run, is it time to rotate sectors to small cap soon?
Yeah, so here's the answer to the question. Anyone who tells you they know when the regime that we're in is going to change is a legend in their own mind. So I would ignore anybody who tell you that. Having said that, what we do know is that valuations are by far the best predictor we have of future returns. But you don't know when those returns are going to come. Bubbles can get bigger. So for example, many of you, I'm sure, on this call will remember that Alan Greenspan coined the phrase when he said the markets were irrationally exuberant. That was in December 95, I think, or maybe it was December 96. At any rate, the next several years, the rest of that decade, stocks went on to make new highs every year, returning, I think, over 25% a year those next 3 years. You know, he turned out to be right because the market then crashed in the tech.com bubble bursting in March of 2000. He was just 3 years too early. So I think, we're in for a regime change. The odds greatly favor that because valuation spreads are wide. But I would never tell you to try to time that. The best I would do is to do maybe what I do. I use the term, I'm going to sin, but sin a little. So, for example, if you had allocated, say, 25% to small value and 25% to the S&P, maybe you move it to 20 to the S&P and 30 to small value. So move it 5%, something like that. Certainly no more than a 10% swing. That's the kind of shift. At the end of last year, I thought emerging markets and international had reached record lows in valuations. So I moved a little bit more money, not only rebalancing, I went from maybe 12% emerging market to 14. That's the way I try to take advantage of this. I'm very humble of an understanding that I cannot predict when the regime changes are going to occur. I'm humble about my ability to say, if interest rates are going to come down, I told you earlier, the Fed can't even forecast interest rates well. And active managers trying to, forecast interest rates and outperform the bond market, almost none of them succeed. They're even worse than stock pickers. Well over 90% of active bond managers, in terms of maturity, they underperform their indices. So don't try to time it. Be willing to stick with it. And remember that even 10 years is noise when it comes to, financial markets. You have to have a very long-term discipline. You don't, you really want to act like Warren Buffett. You can be sure he isn't changing his strategy, even though his funds have underperformed the market for the last 16 years.
Thanks so much. Do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
Great. We have a question from Janice, who said, I've heard through Northern Trust that the institutional investor has gone from 85% now down to 45% over the last 10 years. The retail investor, less sophisticated, is now driving the market. This is in contrast to what you just said. Could you comment?
Yeah, I don't know where they're getting their data, but it's clearly wrong. It is definitely wrong. And all you have to do is look at the number of mutual funds and hedge funds. They're in the tens of thousands today. And the stocks held by individuals in their brokerage accounts is a small percentage. And they certainly don't control the dollars that would allow them to do that kind of trading. Just think about high frequency traders like, Millennium do sometimes tens of thousands of trades a day. How could anyone think individuals are doing 80% of the trading or even half of it? I don't know where they're getting the data.
Yeah, and the question said 45, which which wouldn't be the majority anyway. But anyway, I thought it would be a good one to ask.
At least to my knowledge, they are way off.
Erica, I don't think that question counts. Why don't we do one more?
Sure. Okay. Now don't know if I'm sophisticated enough to understand this question, but Edward asks, now with ETF and computer-driven sell and buy trades, can't there be panic selling or irrational buying driven by computer algorithm? Is buying low and selling high still a gamble?
Well, to answer the first part of the question, absolutely. This is nothing new. We had that in the Black Monday in October of '87. We had computer-driven trading driving prices. We've had a few what are called flash crashes. For those interested, you could just do a Google search on the term flash crash and you'll find a few of them. I think in particular, because the markets have become actually far less liquid, even though there's much more trading than there's ever been, small amounts of dollars are moving prices much more than ever before because 50% or so of the dollars are now invested passively with people just, holding index funds or others. So they're, at least in theory, not trading, right? So what's happened, there was a recent study done and they found that $1 today invested or removed from the market is moving prices $5. And so you can get these massive moves very quickly. And that's why it's important to be disciplined because they're usually corrected. Unless there's some news that causes it, and then you get it to drop quickly and maybe keep going down. But sometimes it's just some algorithmic program, and that's telling you you should just rebalance and take advantage of it. Buying low and selling high is a far better strategy than buying high and selling low. And the way to do that without trying to is simple. Just rebalance your portfolio whenever it moves more than I had suggested in my books, a 5-25 rule. So let's say your portfolio is 60% equities. So if it goes above 65, sell. Stocks have done really well. Take advantage of it. Take some chips off the table. And if it drops below 55, buy more cheaper, right? But the 5% rule would apply, or sorry, the 25% rule would apply to, say, a sub-asset class. Maybe you're looking at, real estate and you want it to be 10% of your portfolio. Well, you don't maybe really want it to go up 50% from 10 to 15 or down 50% from 10 to 5. So I would take 25% of the 10, and that would be 2.5. So your barriers would be 12.5 and 7.5. So whichever is the driving number, that's the one that I would use. So if you come up with 25% is the smaller number, use that.
Well,
and that's the way to buy buy low and sell high, and avoid panic selling and avoid chasing returns. Let me give one last example, which will really be helpful for your audience, Jim. So I invested in a fund run by Stonebridge called their reinsurance fund. To me, it's the most logical investment in the world for reasons I gave earlier. Hurricanes and earthquakes don't cause bear markets, and bear markets don't cause hurricanes and earthquakes. And insurance companies don't write policies to lose money. They know they can when the risks show up, but they've been in business for 150 years, generating excellent returns. Okay. When I first invested in the fund had a no loss return of 15%. Now, no one expects no losses. The expected or median of a wide distribution of possible outcomes was 7%. You knew you could lose 30, 40, 50. The most you could not lose is 0, right? So the right tail, the best return you could get was 15. The worst return might have been maybe minus 30%. But the expected return was 7 because the losses were 8. So 15, no loss, 8 expected loss, 7% expected return. T-bills were 2%, 5% premium for a portfolio that has on average half the volatility of stocks, uncorrelated. So get a bear market, reinsurance might do well or it might do poorly. First 4 years, the fund does virtually exactly as expected, delivered about a 5% risk premium. The next 3 years, really bad luck. California, wildfires, bad hurricanes. The fund lost about 35%. After the first 4 good years, money flowed in like crazy. $5 billion was now in the fund. At the end of the 3 bad years, then one pretty good year, up 6 or 7, then it lost 5. So now you had 4 out of 5 bad years. The fund dropped to $1 billion, and most of that was due to investors fleeing. Now, as I told you, all risk assets are going to experience bad periods. 3 years is noise. If you have to expect there are going to be periods of bad performance. Otherwise, there's no risk. Just sit and wait 5 or 10 years, and you're guaranteed to get that good return. That's nonsense. There has to be the risk. It's also true in U.S. stocks. As I told you, we showed you 3 periods of at least 13 where you had no risk premium, right? Okay, so what happened? All risk assets have a self-healing mechanism. What do I mean by that? Stocks do poorly, their PE ratios go down, and so the expected returns go up. Credit losses happen because the economy does poorly. What happens? Underwriting standards tighten, credit spreads widen, yields go up. Self-healing. Reinsurance, what happens? Well, guess what happened to insurance premiums? Went way up. What happened to deductibles? Anyone who owns a home in California trying to buy fire insurance, premiums went up like 60%. Deductibles went way up. Underwriting standards went way up. You want fire insurance? No two trees within 30 feet of each other, no trees within 30 feet of the house, no brush for another 30 feet, that kind of thing. Hurricanes in Florida. Now your winds, your windows have to be able to withstand 140, 150-mile winds. All those things meant that the risks went down, but the premiums went way up. Last year, the fund went up 44.5%, and 80% of the money wasn't there, was gone. I bought more because I was rebalancing. And this year, the fund is up 23 or 24% so far, and is likely next year expected about the same returns. That's the key to being a successful investor. Ignore periods 3, 4, 5, 10 years of bad performance. And you could do that because you don't have all your eggs in one basket. You should be highly diversified. And the same thing is true here. Small value is underperformed. So what's the result? Low valuations relative to growth stocks, higher expected returns. Not a guarantee, but that's what you should expect. International underperformed, valuations are much cheaper, higher expected returns, but not a guarantee. So I would tell people, I'm the same 60-40, basically US international for my equity allocation, although I have sinned a little, and now I'm 50-50 to move that because I think valuations have gotten stretched. So I sinned a little. I wouldn't get out of all my US stocks, of course, but I did move it slightly. For the average investor, I would tell you don't sin, but just stick with your portfolio. So hopefully that was helpful for everybody. Hopefully you'll get those lessons, and we'll make sure Jim gets that presentation.
Well, Larry, I want to thank you so much. I think you've been provided so much wisdom for our listeners. And we are going to have the link to your book. We are going to pass on, if not today, the generous offer that you made to share your slide deck. I know I have a few closing words, and I know Erica wants to talk about how everybody can sign up for all the bonuses. But Larry, thank you again. You've been a great source of information, as frankly I expected, and certainly much better than me droning on for another hour, which was the original plan. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. And I'll sign off here, and I'll get that presentation off to you, Jim.
Okay, very good.
Thanks so much. Now, Jim, would you like to, we did have some questions for you. I had one reserved. Maybe I'd ask you one question and then we can wrap up.
Fair enough.
Okay, great.
You know, I rarely say no to a question, even though we are a little over, but I have a few, let's say, relatively brief comments, and then I know you want to tell everybody how to get all the bonuses.
Yes, absolutely. And please stick around for all of that at the end. I will give all of the bonus information and answer any questions that specific questions that anyone has about getting the bonuses. Okay. So this is a question for you, Jim. For parents planning, this comes from Terrence in Virginia. For parents planning for special needs adult child age 31, is Roth conversion, like up to the top of the 24% bracket, still as critical now that the 2017 tax cuts look like they will remain in place? Note, we have a lot of pre-tax assets and are several years from our first RMDs. We have 950,000 combined in Roths now. Any general thoughts?
Well, first, if I gave any answer other than run the numbers, Jen would have my head. That said, I will take the liberty of saying a couple things. First, I love Roth IRA conversions when the beneficiary, you didn't make this really clear, but most likely is going to be some type of special needs trust. And the advantage of having a special needs trust or a special needs beneficiary, which technically qualifies as an EDB, eligible designated beneficiary, is just like the rules for all non-spouses before the year 2000, the beneficiary or the trust could stretch or defer the minimum required distribution of the inherited IRA, or better yet, the inherited distribution of the Roth IRA over their lifetime. So in general, I love to see Roth IRA conversions, even if sometimes the beneficiary will be in a lower tax rate, just because I love all those years of tax-free growth. And by the way, it is exactly what we are doing for our daughter, who is going to end up with probably more than $1 million of Roth IRA, because we see the benefits. Now, in her case, she doesn't have, the nature of her disability is that it will not likely significantly decrease life expectancy. And we are planning to, to provide for her for not just our lives, but for the rest of her life. That said, I think I would be doing you a disservice if I said, oh, yes, go to the top of the 24%, go to the top of the 22%, without considering what else is going on in the family, without considering what your needs are. You didn't mention if there are other siblings, but that might be an opportunity for that strategy that I called who gets what. And I hope that that is helpful. And by the way, let me repeat an offer that isn't made for anybody that does have a child with a disability. And I don't maybe do it through the chat, or I'm not sure how to do it. But in addition, we're going to give everybody a digital copy of this book. And by the way, you have my permission to share it freely. This book is not about royalties. It is about trying to spread good information to a population that, frankly, is in much greater need than most people, because parents like me are, one of our primary concerns is how are we going to provide for our child after we are gone. And this book with two other co-authors has a lot of great information. So you have permission, and we'll send it to you in a form that if you know somebody with a child with a disability, you can just go ahead and forward that. But if anybody is in that position, I want you to request a hard copy, because if you're like me, you prefer a hard copy to a digital copy. So why don't I wrap up with a few thoughts? Some of those are on a slide deck that maybe Eric can put in front of me, and I will try to be relatively brief, and then we will go to Erica to wrap up. I'm sorry for going over. Frankly, when you have a guy like Larry, I even felt guilty saying, well, that's enough. On the other hand, people don't like to go over. So I will be relatively brief, but let me tell you what the opportunity is, and that's going to be, Erica, that's going to be at the bottom of the slide, or close to the bottom. Yeah, we're way off. We probably want to go to about 130, 100 or 140.
While you guys work on that,
All right, one more question while Eric works on that. How's that?
oh, okay, great. Sure. Yes. Actually, let's see. There was a question for you and Larry. Hold on. Oh.
Well, I don't want to take an investment question, so.
No, it wasn't an investment question. It was talking about, are you like, several people were saying, we understand what you're saying about holding off on Social Security. However, given that the fund is projected to be insolvent by, I believe it was 2034, does that change your perspective?
Well, all right, I do want to take that question because that is important.
Yeah, I thought you might want to.
All right. And the other thing is, and I didn't want to upstage him, but Larry said if you have a short life expectancy, that might be a good reason to hold off. On the other hand, do remember with Social Security that the surviving spouse gets the higher of the two benefits. So let's say, for discussion's sake, I am 62 years old and I just went to the doctor and he says, hey, I have bad news for you. You'll be lucky to live 5 years. And you say, oh, well, in that case, I better take my Social Security early. But let's say your spouse is in fine health and we expect that she's going to live another 30 years. I would still tell you to hold off because I want you to get those raises. And even if you do die young, as your doctor might have predicted, then your spouse gets the benefit of that additional Social Security for their entire lives. The next issue, or the next part of the question, is should you start playing games because of what you read about Social Security going broke? And this has been a question for years and years and years. And here's a couple of things that I would say. Politically, it is just almost impossible to let the Social Security system go broke. Yes, the projections at the current rate. So how do you fix that without a huge infusion of money? Well, you just make a little bit of a dent in some of the rules. So maybe instead of full retirement age, it used to be 66 and now it's inching up, and then 67. Maybe you make it 67 and a half, and just that change will do it. So is it possible that you're going to have some problems for, let's say, people who are now in their 50s and 60s? Yes, but people who, let's say, are in their, let's say, mid 60s, would I recommend taking it because of a fear of holding off? I think that that's a bad idea. As Larry said, it is kind of, you're betting on living, and it is by far the best investment in terms of any type of insurance investment and anything that you could get in the private sector.
Allow me to ask you some important questions. Do you want to protect yourself and your family from massive income tax acceleration? Are you at least slightly concerned that future income and other tax increases will unnecessarily decimate your hard-earned savings and threaten the financial legacy you plan to pass on to your children and grandchildren? Are you willing to take action and defend yourself from government confiscation of your hard-earned money? Are you ready to take proactive steps that could help you and your heirs get the most out of what you've got? If you answered yes, this short video could be the most important thing you have ever watched. Imagine you could wave a magic wand and have a rock-solid financial master plan that has all your financial affairs in order. Think about how you would feel if you never had to worry about money because you had solid data that allowed you to make informed financial decisions, not guesses. How much better would you sleep at night knowing your financial master plan is in place? I'm going to share with you how you can make that happen. But first, let's talk about why it's so crucial to develop and implement your holistic, long-term retirement and estate plan. First, thanks to the sunsetting of the rates set by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, it's likely that your current income taxes will go up in 2026. But even if legislation is passed to enshrine the current rates before they expire, raising income tax rates isn't the only way to raise taxes. Jim Lange predicted the death of the stretch IRA and advocated defenses against it more than 5 years before the Secure Act became law. Jim had the foresight that almost no other retirement and estate planning experts did. He understood that the end of the preferential tax treatment of inherited IRAs and retirement plans wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. Now Jim predicts higher capital gains tax rates, changes to federal tax exemptions, elimination of step-up in basis rules, and estate tax increases. Congress pulled a bait and switch on you, and it was just plain wrong. You were promised that contributions to your IRAs and retirement plans would pass to your heirs with significant tax advantages. Remember the stretch IRA? Because you're fiscally responsible, You acted on that promise. You sacrificed so you could put as much money as you could into your retirement plans. Then, late in the game, Congress pulled the rug out from under you by passing the Secure Act. The consequence of Congress's actions with the Secure Act? A massive income tax acceleration on money you thought was protected. But there is a way for you to fight back and protect your wealth from the Congress's greedy hands. We can offer you the means and the tools to pull back some of that money. There is no single strategy that will solve all these problems and ensure your future financial security. Nor is there a one-size-fits-all combination of strategies that is right for everyone. But Jim and his team will help you find the right combination for you and your family. Here are just a few of the strategies in Jim's arsenal. A series of timely Roth IRA conversions to be executed over a number of years. Social Security optimization. Lifetime safe spending analysis. Spend the right money first analysis. Appropriate asset location analysis. Estate plan evaluation. Lifetime and testamentary gifting strategy, including leveraging lifetime gifts to children and grandchildren, and our tax-savvy Who Gets What estate planning analysis. And all of these will be adapted to your unique situation and calibrated to provide the best results for you and your family. The choice to develop your financial master plan is not a choice to maintain the status quo. It's a proactive choice to improve upon the status quo and secure the future you dream of for yourself and your family. When you meet with Jim, he may propose implementing the superbly flexible Lange's Cascading Beneficiary Plan. Its flexibility protects your spouse, allows for the possibility of directing money to your children after the first death, and allows for the possibility of directing money to your grandchildren with parents as trustees. These options are not available with traditional planning. Lange's Cascading Beneficiary Plan is really an estate planning system that should be considered for virtually all of your assets. It works for wills and revocable trusts, IRAs and retirement plans, Roth IRAs, and Lange's Cascading Beneficiary Plan is only one tool in Jim's arsenal. The first step toward peace of mind and a good night's sleep is to request a Retire Secure consultation with Jim Lange. During your 1-hour private Zoom consultation with Jim and one of his number-crunching CPAs, you'll discover how to cut your taxes and preserve your wealth. Jim will answer all your questions and concerns and likely suggest 2 or more tax-reducing strategies you had not thought about. Jim takes a multidisciplinary approach to securing your retirement. He accounts for taxes, legal, and investments. Jim has given thousands of consultations over the years and has never had anyone say or even imply that it wasn't worth their time. Why? Because Jim delivers real-world value and not a sales pitch. At the end of your Retire Secure consultation, you will have the outline for a concrete plan of action to maximize your retirement prosperity and generational wealth. Then you will have 3 options. You will thank Jim for his time and valuable recommendations and most likely end up doing nothing. You'll want Jim and his team to run full retirement and estate planning projections, producing your personalized financial master plan for a one-time investment of between $12,500 and $22,500, depending on the complexity of your situation. Or you'll want your personal financial master plan, and you'll want Jim's team to help you implement the plan, and have one of Jim's strategic partners manage at least a portion of your assets. If you select option 3, your personal financial master plan is included for free, and your personal financial master plan will be updated every year at no additional cost, provided you place a minimum of $2 million under management. A no-obligation Retire Secure consultation will likely provide you with at least one idea worth 10 or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can get it now for free, without obligation. The purpose of the Retire Secure consultation isn't to sell you. It is to determine if you are the right fit to work with Jim and his team. Please note that Jim will not take you on as a client unless he thinks he can save you and your family many times his fee. Jim only has a limited number of slots available for the free Retire Secure consultation before there is a waiting list. Since Jim personally conducts each consultation, and there are hundreds of attendees on this virtual event, Jim will almost certainly not have enough available appointments to meet demand. In addition, Jim's team will likely not have sufficient time to meet demand for financial master plan development. Developing each financial master plan is a time and labor-intensive process, and with ongoing obligations to existing clients, Jim and his CPAs only have so much capacity to take on new clients. So, to secure your free Retire Secure consultation with Jim Lange, click the offer link and complete the appointment request form now. Listen, with the uncertainty in the country, it's natural to be concerned about your financial future. But with proper planning, you can protect yourself and your family from massive taxation, get the most out of what you've got, and maximize retirement prosperity and generational wealth. And the first step is simple and free. Click on the offer link and request your Retire Secure consultation with Jim Lange. Don't wait and be disappointed. A happier, less stressful, and more abundant life awaits. Take action to secure your family's financial future now. Request your free Retire Secure consultation by clicking on the offer link.